pleasure and honor to be having you here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us here and everyone for coming in this freezing cold Michigan night. My favorite place in the world to read is in an art gallery, and especially with this kind of art, because I feel like the words are going to be in some way informed by what you're seeing and experiencing here, and you probably would receive it different if we were in a different space. I just want to give a brief thought about this work. The title, Measures of Constriction, like all great titles, is very duplicitous and slightly deceptive, because on the one hand you have this incredible reference to the cinched waist, the painful cinched waist, yet, which is, constriction, yet there are these openings. So you kind of can imagine things flowing in and out, and then there's also this elongation of the pieces. So in a funny way, there's no restriction at all. So I find that dialectic really interesting, having spent quite a bit of time looking at these works while we were getting ready for the show. So, nice title, nice work. I'm going to read a chapter from this book, Shynkus and Kiddo, a saga that has exclusively to do with fashion. I've never read this chapter before, but the character, Meg Kiddo, ex-husband Dino Shynkus, Meg had a lot of problems as a young girl in school because she couldn't really follow lessons, and teachers thought she was being asocial or difficult, but it turns out she was just incredibly visually astute, and she would get caught up in the way a letter looked on the blackboard, or the shoes that her teachers wore, or some kind of small detail. And once her parents understood this, they took her to the store and she started making dioramas. And this was her way of engaging with the world, was buying these little things and constructing them very carefully. And then she went on to other things, as you'll hear. And each chapter of this book starts with a song, and this one is Nothing Compares to You by Prince. So this is Meg Kiddo. In college, I lose interest in diorama construction. The connecting issue grows overwhelming and leaves me perspiring, panicked, just how I feel pre-diorama back in elementary school. I never thought that feeling would come back, but boom, it does. I move on and welcome the change. I make friends in college, earn solid grades, learn that doing well academically takes way less effort than constructing my imaginary worlds. My dioramas entailed hard thinking, invention, love. All this goes into my villages, landscapes, characters, and their gear. Not to mention the technical challenges, applying polish to a pinky nail, replicating bananas that are overly ripe with brown streaks as well as basic yellow, getting the skin tone of an injured sailor just right. The grades, in contrast at school, mean shutting off deep thinking and just following a system. I realize my problem with school is that I try too hard to pay attention. Once I turn my mind off, I just answer the questions and do fine. Anyway, this makes it easier for me to socialize and do extracurricular things in college, like join film and drama clubs. My drama club involvement starts with costumes. I help choose and alter outfits for the actors. I learn how important get-ups are for the performance. If the actor's great, the costumes enhance. By the way, I love it when the word great is linked to a dramatic role. She was a great Medea, or Blanche, or Hedda. He was a great Lear, Loman, Danton. If the actor does not emote, or maybe worse, if the actor does not emote, or maybe worse, overdoes it, or cannot even carry a tune, you at least can look at and be convinced by tailored trousers, work boots, velvet slippers, interesting sleeves, hemlines, hats. The first production I work on is The Music Man. I alter one of the high-necked, tight-waisted, flouncy skirts for Marion, Madam Librarian. I polish Harold Hill's spats and press his necktie and suit. I smudge dirt on faces, mess up hair, rip holes in pants and dresses when we do Grapes of Wrath. For Orwell's 1984, I find standard button-up shirts and loose pants. I help with makeup, greasy hair, pasty skin. This all bolsters my interest in clothing construction. I once to suggest to my ex-husband Dino that clothes and costumes for actors are maybe something like food presentation. A good meal can be heaped on a plate and still taste fantastic, but if it's arranged nicely, it enhances. He says, lots of people suggest that presentation's important, but the emphasis on food and visuals is bullshit. Arrangement has fucking nothing to do with meal quality. Pretty arrangements that taste mediocre suck, and that is where so many restaurants go now. Tasty food that looks messy is fine. Dino does not think abstractly. I spend a lot of time with him saying, well, I mean not always, but maybe sometimes you could look at it that way. Another part to this Dino dislikes is the idea of eating with eyes. Some chefs say this, we eat with our eyes. This really bothers Dino. He feels there's a place for it, but it's gotten out of control. So that opinion might cause the overreaction. By the way, he's also not an advocate of the blind food experience that some eateries advocate now, where meals are eaten in pitch dark or while diners wear eye masks, supposedly so they just focus on the taste. Anyway, after working on theatrical productions, I re-examine the outfits I make for my diorama figures and remember how much time and thought I put into them. Clothes and I have a strong history. You can see my interest level even back then was high. The pioneer on an Iowa ranch has a dress made of muslin. The beads on a hippie's bracelet are thought out. The color and pattern are wise. A princess wears tulle and silk on her skirt, in her skirt. The cowboys with boots and leather vests. The princes with their pumps, tights, exposed socks, and knickers. The pipe organ player in a stiff suit with shoulders raised, torso hunched over the keyboard. Yes, I'm accurate at clothing construction, but what's the purpose? I feel like I'm going to let everyone down. Full disclosure, some people are picky about food or exercise. I have a tough stomach and do not care about physical movement, but as I grow older, I become particular about how I dress. I cannot leave the house if I'm not wearing something that expresses what I want it to. I'm not proud of being this way. My mom has a hard time eating, especially since she gets sick. She, too, is always careful about what she wears, maybe because of her sister Gina, or maybe Gina gets her fine clothes sense from Mom. I don't care how other people dress unless they come to me for professional or friendly advice. I take a stab making clothes for people, not dolls and figures. So through various patterns and thread material, I reacquaint myself with my mom's singer. Sewing is not as fun as diorama construction, and I'm not as good at it. I mean, the pieces are nothing I would try to sell a store or to another person. They aren't really very good at all. I enjoy working with my hands and understand handwork enough to understand I am not a skilled craftsperson. Nothing like my Aunt Gina's friend, the seamstress. But even more important than my mediocre handwork is that I lack another quality, crucial for a great designer: speed. Great designers get a sense of culture, and culture changes rapidly. I do not move fast, as you can probably tell. Thoughtful, a little whiny. Fashion moves fast. Designers have to catch the wave, the moment, the zeitgeist, but understand that it only lasts fleetingly. Then they have to scout out the next thing. Again, this is something the seamstress manages so well. Speed lies outside my skill set. Shopping does too. I always shopped with Mom and never realized how heavily I relied on her to help choose clothes and fend off salespeople. Wait, bad choice of words. Mom never fends them off. She deals with them firmly, politely, elegantly. She keeps them at bay. I just feel scared and helpless and pushed into a series of bad decisions. Mom is an ace shopper. She comes home with clothes that fit her and that she needs. She does not overspend, but when I move away for a while and in her stores alone, I come home with things that are wrong, wrong, wrong. I get caught up in the pitch and cannot wait to get home, so I say yes to everything the salespeople suggest. And then I have a pile of clothes that look and feel terrible on me. I'm not saying they're bad, they're just not me. I don't like shopping in stores. I'm not equipped. I hate how salespeople look at and talk to me. I hate how I appear in mirrors. I hate how I can never stand up to salespeople. I hate being the center of their attention. I find a note I scribbled in an old pocket of an old coat. These salespeople make me feel ugly and inferior. Not inferior the way my childhood heroine, Harriet the Spy, did, because I admired Harriet. She had a good skill set and personality. Harriet is deep, thoughtful, sensitive, but these people just seem to want to be well-groomed and sell. I just don't have the ability to stand up for them. I tell all this to Mom unedited. I probably would never be so honest or petty to anyone else, but Mom, I know, will always love me. She listens and then says, she understands I'm not a trend follower, but as far as my negativity towards sales staff goes, I'm being unkind, perhaps egotistical. That it's easy but wrong to make up negative things about people, especially ones earning a paycheck. She says I'm letting things get to me that I should not, and that my cynicism is not going to strengthen or better me. She says I'm making those salespeople out to be evil, and they're not. They're just people doing their jobs, following their training. She then goes on to say, I have special taste. Maybe I know more than them. Maybe I could educate them. When my Aunt Gina, my mom's sister, comes home after living away for so many years and asks if I would like to work in her new clothing store, Simply Separate, I think she's kidding. But as sometimes happens with wise relatives, she sees potential in me, I don't. Initially, I questioned the value of that profession, but grow to love it. So I, a lousy shopper, at least without Mom, carve out a profession working in retail. Initially, I wonder, is this enough? But progress is not linear. And that explains why I loved and still love dioramas. No trajectory. The clothes at Simply Separate are carefully constructed, better made than most of those enormous novels I read in bed on nights when Dino has our daughter Althea. I mean, I rely on big books. More than one gets me through an evening, but some just do not tell as good a story as our blue velvet, nipped at the waist biker midi jacket that sold out last fall, or this season's black ruche skirt with an irregular hemline and lace waist detail. While I enjoy the store on my job, I cannot understand my aunt's faith in apparel, its power to protect, enhance, save, destroy. I respect, just cannot entirely relate to her devotion. The thing, though, I will say about Aunt Gina, she sticks by me. This does not happen with everyone, and this is an aside, but I have to put it somewhere, so why not here? This is my perspective on a pattern I must be more than partly to blame for. I just don't understand it. I meet countless people. First, they think I'm interesting, then they don't. Then, sometimes, but only sometimes, they do again. And usually when they do, it's after grasping my ties to charismatic people like Dino and Aunt Gina. Aunt Gina is consistently popular, and she stands by me. My basic take on her relationship to Simply Separate: clothes are to my aunt what food is to my ex-husband, the chef Dino, what finance is to my brother-in-law George, what stories are to Mom. I don't know if I'll ever have an adult connection to or passion for a profession or even hobby like they do. This is what means most to me: relationships with human beings. My craving for people connections may be a pitfall or strength. I was not always this way. I think it started when I had our daughter, Althea. Anyway, I deeply love friends and family and really like the store. Simply Separate rescues me. First, the name helps me finally lose those hurt feelings left over from the conference Mom had with the teachers who tell her I'm simple, meaning dull and ill-equipped. Diorama assembly heals that some, but not completely. Second, it teaches me to look differently at words. Simple. Simple does not mean bad or stupid. The store name Simply Separate comes from this line by a great American poet, Walt Whitman: "Oneself I sing, a simple, separate person." The line is from a long poem, Leaves of Grass. To me, the line means being at once in and not in the stream of things. Another thing the line makes me think: we, that is people, are and yet are not linked tightly together. When you read more of Whitman's stanza, it also addresses other things like the social. Yet utter the word democratic, the word en masse. And the corporal, physiology, from top to toe I sing. And justice, the female equally with the male I sing. Joy, zest, of life immense and passion, pulse, and power. And contemporary, the modern man I sing. I'm no scholar, and neither is my aunt, but individuals, neighbors, bodies, and appetites are things she keeps in mind on buying trips. By neighbors, we do not mean people who live geographically close to one another. Our store bags, organic beige, say this: simply separate, one self I sing, a simple, separate person. Walt Whitman. In between the store name and the quote and the author citation, there's a sketch of the great poet, a majestic presence, beard, high cheekbones, large brimmed hat. When I see photographs of him, I'm struck by his eyes. They're striking, and I have to stop myself from inventing stories about his personality. Kind, vain, confident, passionate. But it's impossible for the drawing on simply separate packaging to capture that. In my opinion, the line of physiology from top to toe I sing should be on the bags. But my aunt says people would think we were a juice bar or a bodywork studio. The store boxes, quote, will reference, do not quote, another great American, Gertrude Stein. I dress for myself and strangers. The original line, I write for myself and strangers. Here's more of the quote, which is from The Making of Americans. I am writing for myself and strangers. This is the only way that I can do it. Everybody is a real one to me. Everybody is like someone else too to me. No one of them that I know can want to know it, and so I write for myself and strangers. So both literary references that Aunt Gina chooses for her packaging contain the word self, contain the word of, in the work title, and are written by Americans, though Simply Separate's designers are in fact global. She has no American designers. Besides, when Dino sees the box, he says, I cook for myself an offal. Over time, he stays attached to the slogan, but once he solidifies things with his new wife, Eiley, he changes the I to we. They adopt the slogan and even make a plaque. We cook for ourselves and for organs. They take it to each offal specializing pop-up and hang it on their upstate establishment when they finally get one. Thinking about this makes me sad and happy at once. Sad because of what I lost, happy because of what we all have or are starting maybe to have. Back to our boxes, Back to our boxes. Below Stein's quote is a sticker of her. Whitman is sketched on the bag. Stein's photograph is reproduced on a sticker and stuck on. The image is taken from an elegant picture. She's older, radiating well-being. So much is white. Her hair, blouse, wide collar, V-neck. The image of Gertrude Stein, solid, confident, relaxed, reminds me of a writer I met once in person, Jim Harrison, a friend of Dad's. I met him in Florida. He stood under a palm tree, legs apart, solid, rooted, at ease. Gertrude and Jim both have broad faces. Both are beautiful, not traditionally pretty or handsome, but beautiful. Something inside radiates out. You just know these two are not socially awkward. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. That was great. Again, I want to just thank Michael and Lynn for being here. And for me, as an artist, making and displaying the work is just as important as discussing it and questioning it. And I'm hoping tonight with this and with the audience that we'll be able to do this in the context of this show. My goal for this show is to make objects that reflect the tension and constrictions that have been placed on women historically and in the present. Fashion is one way in which these constrictions manifest themselves. In some instances, literally constricting, as in the case of the corset. If clothing is a significant and a form of communication, what does women clothing say throughout history? In his book, The Language of Fashion, Roland Barthes states, clothing concerns all of human person, all of the body, all of the relationships of man to body, as well as the relationship of the body to society.
That's it?
Yeah.
It's
You want me to
wonderful.
keep going?
That is wonderful. No, thank you. Christina, I'd also like to thank you very much for the invitation, and delighted to be up here with an old friend, Lynn, and Annika. This work is really, really stupendous and really intriguing. And I would like to sort of kick off the title. I mean, first, if I might allow myself just to say that I wanted to, when I came in, I sometimes don't want to know the artist statement. I just want to come in and look at the objects and say, I don't know what these are. And it's so wonderful not knowing, quote, what these are. And that there's a kind of deliciousness in being disoriented before things begin to settle down. A bit like you, Lynn, when you said earlier that, you know, there's the idea of things being cinched and constricted, and yet there are these openings. And I initially thought of these as things that I might have seen in some adult version of Alice in Wonderland. Mm-hmm. You know, there is a kind of make-believe quality in them, but also an incredible seriousness. So I just approached them as poetic objects before allowing myself to begin to get a sense of where you are coming from in making them. And then I started to think about the title measures of constriction. And I suppose if you don't mind, it's not that I have an answer, I certainly don't. I was intrigued by the title. I found the title to be poetic and rich. And it made me think of measures. Does that mean there are degrees of constriction? That there are types of constriction? So there are degrees of constriction and types of constriction. There are different orders of constriction. What were you trying to get at in the title beyond what I think is a really, really poetic utterance?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. There are different ways of constriction within measurements. It really, for me, and kind of brainstorming and thinking of a title for this was also through my making. And I'm constantly wearing my measure tape around my neck. And I approach sculpture the same way I approach garment making. And I'm constantly measuring, and I'm also constricting myself within these measurements through making of the sculpture within that. So also measurements and what the ideal is too, of that there's a certain size or shape, or going back to the measurements.
That gives us a measure.
That gives us a measure, or that defines what a silhouette is, defines a state of fashion within measurement too, in the way that it's controlled,
Yes.
I should say.
And so, is there anything liberating in the constrictions, which is what I think you were suggesting? Is there anything where you feel that as a result of confronting, because the restrictions, the constrictions are going to be physical, they're going to be social, etc. But are there any ambiguities for you in the question of constrictions?
Yeah, I have to kind of sit on that one. Because I guess, yeah, there is, in a way. There is a little bit of, I guess, a play of control to not controlling within the measurements, and trying to create something that performs to what my ideal of what it is, to it controlling me too. So, yeah.
But where, if I can, I'd love, this is something I want to ask Lynn as well, who is very much interested in constrictions and limitations of patterns. But is there any stage for you where something that starts out as a constriction, let me rephrase my question, something that starts out as a constriction may end up leading you somewhere that you had not previously foreseen. That is to, you see, my initial reaction to these objects, as you call them in your introduction, rather than sculpture, which we might also talk about, my initial reaction is that these are compelling. These are compelling, and that it's not, I don't see straight out the sense of limitation. I see this as visually compelling, and that part of being compelled by them visually is then to get into something that maybe I wouldn't have thought of. So is there anywhere for you that these objects begin in your mind as explorations of something that is constricted but which take you somewhere else?
Of course. I mean, I think they're definitely starting with the ideal of what I want to make, and then also the materials are leading me in other directions. The material is stiff, it's hard, it's not that easy to control. Sometimes it controls me, and sometimes I have to lead within that. And of course, that changes and evolves. And I think for me as a maker and an artist, it's also really important to be listening to your materials, of course, of your ideas and your concepts and what you intend something to be. But at the same time, what you intended an object to be can also evolve and change too. If you're willing to, I guess, kind of balance the constrictions,
Right.
and be able to have that play, I should say.
Would you be able to give us an example from within?
Yeah, I mean, this one for an example too. This is called Dress Reform, and it's based on the dress reform movement that happened in the late 18th century, 19th century. And I really started with these two solid columns, and I was weaving them, and they were just straight. And I had this idea that they were going to come together and then come down. And I was having a really hard time with the straightness to get the curvature that I want. Because I'm constantly, again, thinking of silhouette, basing it back on the female body. How can I give it curves and shape? And it wasn't doing it. So I had to split them apart a little bit. And just start to be able to get the shape that I wanted. And then through there, I think the shape became more interesting. There was a different conversation maybe happening than what I intended it to, but it's still living in the world of where I want it to be within my research.
So what was that? How would you characterize that conversation that started to emerge, which is not where you started? How would you, not saying tell us the meaning, but how would you characterize that conversation, that interaction?
With me in the piece.
Yes, where it's going somewhere else.
Yeah,
because of
I
the
mean, well...
because of the material.
Yeah, of course. I mean, sometimes there's tears. You know, I mean, it's not always easy. It's not, you know, it's, you know, I'm very controlling within my making, and again, I mean, I think most artists are, you approach something like, okay, I want to do this, and I want this to happen there. So it's definitely, it's a fight, but it's also me letting go too a little bit, and being like, okay, so maybe this needs to go this way or that way. And I think that's, for me, as an artist, is hard and easy to do, but that's also where I think things become interesting, and I have to remind myself that too, that I do need to let things go, and I do need to let the materials kind of guide me, to let things kind of evolve or change through that.
Lynn, you brought up right at the beginning this ambiguity.
Well, so full disclosure, I don't always believe what artists say about their work. Or I might believe it, but being a fiction writer, I can make up stories. So full disclosure, I'm making up a story. It might not have anything to do with it, but I see restriction here, but I see it balanced with space and opening and elongation. And so I find it really interesting. They're not like cramped. Do you know what I mean? They're long, and there's almost every piece has some sort of opening or series of openings.
Yes.
So how I think of it is sort of like the way women sort of subversively made art or did things, back in the day, right? So someone would find in their mother's drawer like little snippets of lines instead of a journal with poems. It was like scribbling something, finding ways to get away with things or doing things and that's what I think about here. Looking at this is how do you sort of subversively add space when you're not supposed to? That's one of the things that made me think about. And I think that if you look at it as constricting, you really can see it in every sculpture, but if you wanted to look at it as sort of maybe not escaping, but riffing on restriction or maybe subverting it a little, I mean, because I've been here a lot and looked at this, I think you could possibly see that in each one as well.
Absolutely. I mean, do you agree?
Oh yeah, no, definitely,
Yes?
definitely, yeah.
But then what we're talking about is the way in which because there's a part where your statement sounds programmatic, that we're looking at these are objects that capture the tensions and restrictions to which women have been subject. Mm-hmm. And yet, I don't feel that the objects, and I mean this in an entirely positive way, I don't feel that the objects read programmatically. I think they read as tense. This tension between, for me, it's between tension and openness, right? That here suddenly this sense of softness between what is tight and enclosed. And I'm sort of intrigued even at certain moments. When I came in the first night, I felt there was something musical even about the construction, the regularity of repetition, and then there's suddenly veering off. And they could almost be in some of the musical instruments. And so I'm wondering how much of the programmatic tension and restrictions is in the fabric, in the material, but not the form itself, because the form seems so much more suggestive and surprisingly variable.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. There is a lot. Maybe the tension is happening within the materials, or within me physically making it too, or with this making with it. And I think the looseness comes from the let go of maybe this freedom of it too. And again, with this work, I really wanted to bring in my historical references and my research, but I also wanted it to bring it to the present day,
right.
and really, and where we are. And I think maybe for me, that's where the looseness or the openness or the conversation between the two, I'm hoping that would start to kind of be happening.
Could you share with us what kind of research you were looking at?
Well, mostly the corset, and the corset being a garment that was in fashion for more than 400 years.
Sure.
And it physically constrained the body, like physically changing women's organs, pushing them down, pushing them up. And there's a lot of, with the dress reform movement, was the freeing of the corset. So women fighting to get the right to not wear the corset. Along with that, women got the right to vote. Their roles in society were starting to open it up. So there's a lot of, with the dress reform movement, it was also one of the first waves of feminism. So there's some interesting things that are happening along with clothing and also with women's rights. And that's where my research was, kind of digging into historically. And then bringing that and thinking about it contemporarily, where we are as women, and what that means. And
So, Lynn, is this where you would pick up on the wonderful piece that you read on the democratic? Is that a chance? I mean, it's not a chance you chose to read that piece.
Well, I chose to read that piece because it was the piece in my last novel that really did have to do with fashion. And in the way, and trying to connect fashion with ideas, and and sort of, on the one hand, everyone, I think it's fraught, like a lot of us are just fraught with terrible fashion stories. That time you spend your last dollar on a haircut that just looks horrible, or we all have those kinds of stories. But then there's that pair of shoes that you loved when you were 9, and you wish you could find them now, even though they wouldn't look good. There's this sort of attachment. And again, I feel like fashion is this sort of constricting yet liberating potential in the same way these works do. Because I feel that when I'm looking at these, it's like constricted liberation potential. So I think that's why I chose that.
But could you talk about then, say, that the democratic potential of fashion, the need to be liberated from 400 years of control of the female body? Or there's something about that stanza by I named 2 books after it, Simply Separate People 2. It's referenced in this for a third time. There's something about Simply Separate where, are we separate? Are we the same? Are we not? Are we really that different? Like if somebody's looking up from space down on, do we look different? I don't know. I don't know how simply separate we are. I just don't know. It's like one of those sort of things that I just kind of get stuck in my head. And then, of course, it comes from a great American poet. And I dress for myself in strangers. I write for myself and for strangers. That great Gertrude Line, right? Yes.
Again, do you write for yourself or strangers? What about your lover? What about your friends? You don't write for them? There's sort of a interesting kind of funny dialectic there that doesn't quite make sense. I write, but it kind of does. So that's how I was thinking of those 2 lines, and then connecting them to this store that was putting them on their, basically that was their advertising.
But you do think of fashion as something that is capable of being liberating?
It's capable of being liberating, and it's capable of being completely like bullying, and completely not allowing a huge portion of the population. It has both of the. It has both. There's a lot of, very unfriendly, toxic ways clothes are made, and there's just a lot about it. It has the potential. It's both. It's like, again, it's both, right?
And where do you think we are today after 400 years of the corset? We don't have that anymore.
No, we don't.
Unless it's on the catwalk as a statement.
Well, yeah, but there's, it might not be the physical garment, but there's other ways that we're still constricted. And it's being, true to fashion, or having to have the next thing, or keeping up with the haircut, or there's still ways that you might not be physically constricted within the corset, but I still think that women are constricted and still have to play to what the ideals of beauty are, or the ideal of what the new silhouette is.
What is the source of this pressure?
The pressure
Is it legitimate to ask you, as an artist who has done research and incorporates research into her practice, to say, well, to some extent your work must be reflecting upon this? What is the source of that if it's still continuing? Which we're not going to argue that it is.
Yeah, no, I guess it's just, one is, reading and doing research and reading a lot of fashion theory and things like that, but it is just keeping up with fashion, reading about it constantly, living it and being part of it. And also, of course, I believe that every artist's work is also a personal narrative to a certain extent. It just depends on how much you want to reveal. And so, of course, this is my own personal view and my thoughts, or of what I have lived to as a woman, of trying to be part of the ideal and trying to figure out where I fit into what beauty means.
So would it be fair then to say it's the struggle to liberate oneself from an externally imposed ideal?
Yes, or figure out where you fit into that. Right?
Where do you fit into that?
I'm not sure. I mean that's something, that I think is a question that I don't know a lot of women that could answer that question. You say, like, I think it's something that's constantly evolving and changing, and especially as we get older, and, it's... Yeah.
But could you accept the statement that Lynn made a moment ago, that fashion can be liberating?
Of course.
Then what does that mean?
That means that fashion can also make you feel really good. And fashion is a way of expression, and fashion is a means to be able to express your own identity, right? me choosing to just wear this outfit today. Everything was very intentional within it. But it was also a way for me wanting to show who I am through a garment, through the shoes that I picked. I mean, these are all ways that we do it every day, and even people that I think that say, no, I don't like fashion and I don't care about this, that's a choice. That still means that you're saying you don't care about it to the point where you're still thinking about it.
Well, anyone who ever says that, I just take them to the nearest computer and show them the cerulean blue scene in The Devil Wears Prada. Right? Oh, you think that you are above all this,
Yes.
do you? And just run through the way in which everything is connected. You know, that we're not completely separated. So isn't that the problem then, that we are still wanting to participate in something that we cannot divide out neatly into what is good and what is bad? That the thing that might make us feel ourselves is also something that is part of something that would constrict us as well.
Yeah.
It doesn't ring true for me for some reason.
What doesn't?
Where you're going with this, I feel like in the same way, some people just like salty food and some people like sweet food or whatever. I think that there's sort of a, maybe some people are sort of hit with this societal, whatever they expect, societal expectation is where you work, if there's a certain way, or if you have friends who are really stylish or whatever it is. But I also feel like deep down, some people just don't care and some people do. I mean, some people just don't like sweets and some people would live on them. And I feel like there is this thing, and maybe, I don't think it's just pressure. I think some people just are in tune with a certain thing, and some things just don't interest them, and it does interest other people. And
I'm not saying that it's just pressure. What I'm saying is that the thing what is fascinating is the thing that we can find liberating is also the same thing that other people want to fight against. And so, I mean, when I look at the work of, say, someone like Alexander McQueen, that's what I see going on, that the extraordinary combination of beauty and violence in McQueen, there we see constriction, for instance. I see that he has now managed to make an art precisely by saying, this is what I'm going to investigate. I'm going to investigate that tension between what is so constricting and what potentially is also liberating. I'm saying that, so it's not a choice. I'm saying in a way that
for him,
isn't
definitely.
that part of the problem with what we call fashion, which is that there isn't this choice, and that's why we end up being interconnected with all the things that we don't like as well. I mean, that's the thought that I'm sort of throwing out there. You talk also in that wonderful quote from Barthes that clothing is all of the body. Do you distinguish between the body as just a structure on which things put, and the body as skin? And Freud talks about clothing as a skin. Right? And here you're talking about clothing as being part of all of the body. Do you at any point distinguish between clothing as a form of skin and the body as that which you put the clothing on, just a structure?
I think the body is an armature.
As an armature, that's the word, yes.
Yeah, so
yes.
I've always, in all my work, I've always been interested in the body as the armature. I am really interested also but in the dialogue too between the clothing and the body. So also, I guess, when it becomes a skin in that way. So yeah, that's the place that I am at with thinking about the body. But I also, along with saying that it's an armature, I'm also very curious in the way that I can change, inform, and recreate what the armature actually is within sculpture, but also within garment making and that.
So do you see this as a kind of experimental stage in reconceiving garment making?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I mean, yeah, because I really, because there's a lot of my trade and my skills from that are coming in and making this in sculpture. I'm also really questioning too is when does a garment become sculpture? So when is it that these boundaries kind of cross over? And I think there's something really interesting within that too.
I can see why you would be interested in Rei Kawakubo.
Yes.
Because that's one of her questions, not questions, it's one of the things that she explores there between the garment and sculpture. When does a garment become sculpture?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Does the body need to be present is something that I'm asking. I think within these sculptures too, there's the absence of the body, but it still infers body, and there's still this kind of thing that's happening. Does a garment have to be functional, or can one of these sculptures be a garment too? Again, there's no answer on these things. They're just questions and things that I kind of think about through my making within that.
That's interesting because I think that's where that Gertrude Stein, I write for myself and for strangers, but you could say I dress for myself and for strangers.
Yes.
And I mean, there are people who never leave the house on a snow day and put their favorite outfit on just because it makes them feel good. And then there's people that would never do that unless they were going out. And so I dress for myself and for strangers. And then, well, what about your family? So it's just sort of interesting that when you're saying that, I mean, I thought about that line of hers.
It's an amazing line.
Yeah.
I mean, because you make that equivalence between writing, dressing. It's. I mean, I think.
What do you do it for?
Yes.
You know, and at what point is it a sculpture, and at what point is it an outfit, and at what point is it for strangers, and at what point is it for yourself, and at what point is it both?
And it's a question that feminism has posed, hasn't it? To the question, for whom do you dress? Was a really important question when I was in college, and the answer was always supposed to be for myself, right? Not for, in other words, do you dress for yourself, or do you dress for the male gaze, right? Do you have some internalized male gaze? And it struck me that one of the things that feminism certainly got us to think about was that you must expel the internalized male gaze in order to be able to dress freely. No? Yes? Did I see somebody out there?